In a galaxy far from Earth, on the towering spires of the alien capital, the grand palace loomed like a fortress, surrounded by vast fields of shimmering crystals. The Emperor, the ruler of the mighty alien empire, sat upon his golden throne, brooding over matters that would decide the fate of his people. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room filled with high-ranking officials and military leaders. The empire was at war, and rebellion was rising among the outer colonies. The emperor knew that in times like these, alliances were not just important, they were everything. He stood up from his throne, his commanding presence filling the hall. The air was thick with tension as he addressed his gathered council. "The rebellion grows bolder with each passing day," the emperor said in a deep, resonant voice. "I need strength, an alliance that will crush this uprising once and for all." The court fell silent. The nobles and generals exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that what the emperor asked would come at a cost. "I will marry my daughter to the strongest warrior in the galaxy. A human," the emperor declared. "The alliance with Earth will strengthen our empire and solidify our rule." The princess, standing behind her father, shivered slightly at the mention of Earth. She had heard stories of the humans, strange, unpredictable creatures who had proven themselves fierce and relentless in battle. But it wasn't just their power that unsettled her. It was something about their warriors. Cold, unyielding, and often, to her, terrifying. Her father's gaze turned toward her. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, but he was unmoved. This was necessary, for the good of the empire. "You will marry him, daughter," the emperor said, his tone final. "The human warrior who has earned his place by defeating hundreds of opponents. He will be our strongest ally." The princess stood still, her heart racing. She couldn't hide the fear that spread through her chest, like a cold hand tightening around her heart. The thought of being married to a human warrior terrified her. She had heard the whispers, the rumors of human warriors who showed no mercy, who fought with a coldness that made even the strongest alien beings tremble. She feared that this warrior might be more than just an ally. He might be a monster in disguise. The princess's thoughts raced as she tried to come to terms with what her father had just decreed. She had always been the prized jewel of the empire, adored and protected by her people. But now it seemed that her future would be dictated by a man she had never met, a warrior from a world far beyond her own. The pressure to marry him was not just about politics, it was about survival. If she didn't agree, the rebellion would only grow stronger, and the empire would crumble. Her father, noticing her hesitation, took a step forward, his voice softening but still filled with authority. "Do not fear him, my daughter. The human warrior is nothing more than a tool to ensure our victory. You will do your part, and together we will secure the future of this empire. You must be strong." The princess bit her lip, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of her father's words, the gravity of the decision she had no choice but to make. It wasn't about love or even desire. It was about duty. The princess had always known that one day she would be married off for the sake of her people, but she had never imagined it would be to someone so alien. As the council meeting continued, the princess tried to push the thoughts of the human warrior from her mind, but they crept back in, more insistent with each passing minute. What kind of man was this human warrior? Was he truly as dangerous as the rumors suggested? Hours passed, and the news of her arranged marriage spread like wildfire through the halls of the palace. The princess could feel the eyes of everyone on her as she walked through the corridors, whispers following her every step. She had always been a symbol of grace and power, but now it felt like her future was slipping through her fingers. The weight of the empire's expectations crushed her, and she felt alone in the vast, cold palace. Later that evening, in the quiet solitude of her chambers, The princess sat by the window, gazing out at the stars. The vastness of space stretched before her, full of possibilities, yet all she could feel was the suffocating reality of her situation. She would marry this human warrior. There was no escaping it. But the fear inside her grew. She couldn't help but picture him, the human warrior, tall and strong, his eyes cold and unyielding. She imagined what it would be like to be near him, to be forced into the same space as a creature so foreign to her, so unpredictable. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Your Highness," came the voice of her most trusted advisor. "It's time to prepare for his arrival." The princess sighed, standing from her seat. She had no choice but to face her destiny. With one last glance at the stars, she turned away from the window and walked to the door. The future was waiting for her, and it was more terrifying than anything she had ever imagined. The next day, the grand hall was prepared for the arrival of the human warrior. Banners of shimmering gold and silver were hung, and the air was filled with the scent of exotic flowers. The princess, wearing a ceremonial gown that was both regal and heavy, stood at the front of the hall, her heart racing. Her father stood. Beside her, his expression one of pride. Then, the doors opened, and the human warrior entered. He was taller than any alien she had ever seen, his dark hair and rugged face striking against the sea of alien nobility. His eyes, cold and unwavering, scanned the room as he walked with the confidence of a man who had seen countless battles and emerged victorious. As he moved closer, the princess could feel the ground beneath her feet grow heavier. She had never been this close to a human before, and the presence of this warrior sent a chill down her spine. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain composed. This was her fate, and she would face it. The human warrior stopped before her, his eyes locking onto hers. The air seemed to thrum with tension, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the human warrior bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the princess, but his eyes never left hers. The princess swallowed again, her throat dry. I welcome you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The warrior nodded once. His silence was unnerving, but there was something in his gaze, something that made the princess wonder if he knew her fear. And in that moment, the princess realized that the challenge had only just begun. The palace was alive with excitement as words spread through the halls like wildfire. The human warrior had arrived. The princess could feel the change in the air. There was an energy, a tension, that hummed through the walls and seeped into the very floor beneath her feet. The grandeur of the palace seemed almost too small for the storm that was about to break. Everyone was waiting, watching, expecting the arrival of the warrior who would change the fate of their empire. The princess paced back and forth in her private chambers, unable to calm the storm of thoughts in her mind. She had spent countless hours imagining what the human warrior would be like, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of his arrival. Her father had spoken of him as though he were a mere tool, a means to an end. But to the princess, he was far more than that. He was a symbol of everything she feared about the humans, about her future. A creature who lived by a code of violence and strength. Someone who could never be swayed by diplomacy or emotion. But as she gazed out of the tall windows that overlooked the vast city below, the princess felt something stir inside her. It wasn't just fear this time. It was curiosity. What was he really like? Would he be as terrifying as her father made him out to be? Or was there something more to him, something hidden beneath the hardened exterior of a battle-worn warrior? The sound of footsteps approaching pulled her from her thoughts. Her heart raced as she turned to face the door. A soft knock came, and the voice of her trusted maid followed. "Your Highness, the human warrior has arrived," the maid said. The princess took a deep breath, her nerves jangling. The moment of truth had arrived. She could no longer hide from it. As she walked toward the grand hall, her mind swirled with 1,000 questions. What would this human warrior think of her? Would he see her as nothing more than a pawn in the game of politics? Or would he see the real her, the princess who had spent her entire life in the shadow of her father's expectations? When she entered the hall, the noise from the gathered officials and nobles quieted instantly. The grand room was a sea of shimmering robes and alien faces, but they all parted to make way for the man who stood in the center, like a storm ready to sweep them all away. The human warrior was tall, towering over everyone in the room, his broad shoulders giving him the appearance of someone who could take on the world itself. He wore dark, simple armor that seemed to be made for practical use rather than show. The dull, matte black of the armor contrasted sharply with the glittering robes of the alien nobles around him. His hair was dark, kept short and practical, and his face was weathered, his eyes intense, scanning the room as though nothing and no one could ever pose a threat to him. The princess felt a flutter in her chest as his eyes met hers. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and yet there was something in it that unsettled her. He wasn't the monster she had imagined. There was no anger in his eyes, no hunger for power. But still, his presence was commanding. The air itself seemed to shift around him, and the princess could feel the weight of the room settle on her shoulders. Her father, standing beside her, gave her a small nudge, bringing her back to the moment. "This is the warrior who will be our ally," he said, his voice laced with pride. "He has fought in countless battles, and his victories are unmatched." The princess nodded, trying to hide the unease that bubbled within her. She was expected to welcome him, to treat him as a future partner in the Empire's rule. But how could she, when all she felt was fear? The human warrior stepped forward, his boots making a soft thud against the stone floor. The silence in the room deepened as he stopped in front of the princess, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of respect. His posture was perfect, the movement smooth and calculated, as though everything he did was part of a larger strategy. "I am honored to meet you, princess," he said in a deep, steady voice. The words weren't what unsettled her. It was the calmness in his tone, the complete lack of uncertainty. He had no fear of her father, of anything. He was simply there, present, ready to face whatever came next. The princess swallowed, forcing herself to speak. I welcome you to our empire," she said, her voice soft but steady. She wasn't sure what she had expected from him, but his response was not what she had imagined. He didn't look at her with the awe that many of her people did. He didn't seem afraid or even particularly impressed by her status. Instead, his eyes remained locked on hers, as if searching for something deeper. She could feel the weight of his gaze, steady and unrelenting. It made her feel exposed, vulnerable, as though he could see straight through her, through the mask of the princess and into the person she was on the inside. Her father, noticing the slight hesitation in her voice, gave her a nod, signaling her to continue with the formalities. "We have much to discuss, warrior. Join us for dinner this evening. The arrangements have been made." The warrior gave a single nod of acknowledgement, his lips curling into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "I will be honored," he said, though the princess didn't feel any warmth from the words. Instead, they felt like a command, an expectation. As the warrior turned and began walking toward the grand dining table, the princess watched him closely. There was something different about him, something that made her nervous but also intrigued. His movements were precise, his confidence undeniable. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to win the Empire's trust and the princess's, and Yet, despite the unease in her heart, there was also a strange pull. Something about his presence called to her, a force that she couldn't ignore. She found herself wondering if perhaps there was more to him than just a warrior's cold exterior. Could there be a future between them? One that wasn't shaped by fear and duty, but by something else? Her thoughts were interrupted as her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do not worry, my daughter," he whispered. "This human warrior is the key to our future. You will grow to understand that soon enough." But the princess wasn't so sure. As the dinner began and the human warrior took his seat among the alien nobles, she found herself watching him carefully. What was he thinking? What did he see when he looked at her? The answers, she realized, were far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The days after the human warrior's arrival felt like a blur to the princess. The formalities continued, the meetings, the ceremonies, the endless parade of expectations from her father and the nobles. All the while, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The human warrior, the one who had arrived so confidently, so assured, and had been placed beside her as though it were nothing more than a simple task. Each time she saw him, the princess felt the same storm inside her. There was something about him that unsettled her, something raw and untamed that made her skin prickle. Yet there was also something she couldn't quite ignore. A strength, yes, but also an unexpected quietness. When he spoke, his voice was calm, his words measured. But his eyes, they were full of something else. Perhaps it was the burden of his past, or perhaps it was the weight of his duty. But the princess couldn't decide. She didn't know whether she feared him more, or if she felt something else entirely. The nights were the hardest. Alone in her chambers, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts running wild. What was it about him that made her feel this way? Why couldn't she simply ignore the growing unease, the rising curiosity that seemed to pull her towards him despite her every instinct? It was in one of these restless moments that she found herself speaking to her most trusted advisor, Lord Valar. He had served the royal family for many years, and his loyalty to her father and to her was unwavering. "Lord Valar?" she said, her voice quiet but laced with worry. "I do not understand him. The human warrior. Every time I see him, I feel like I am exposed, like he can see right through me. I don't know what to make of him." Lord Valar, a man with deep wisdom and a calm demeanor, looked at her with understanding. "Your Highness, humans are a peculiar species. They do not always show their emotions, and yet their presence can be overwhelming. But remember, he is here because your father believes he is essential. He is a tool, nothing more." The princess nodded slowly, but inside, she knew there was more to it than that. It wasn't just about his strength or the power he could bring. She had seen the way he had looked at her. His gaze was not one of disdain or fear, but something different. Something that made her both afraid and intrigued. "Is he truly nothing more than a tool, then?" she asked softly. "Does he not have his own desires, his own thoughts?" Lord Valar paused, considering her question carefully. "Of course he does, Your Highness, but his desires are not ours to worry about. His purpose is clear, to help us win the war, to solidify our power. But what if that is not all he wants?" The princess's voice was almost a whisper now, as if the thought had just occurred to her. What if he sees more in me than just a political pawn?" Lord Valar gave her a knowing look. "You have a powerful mind, princess, and you have your father's strength. But do not forget we live in dangerous times. Your father has already made his decision, and so must you. The marriage is a necessary step, not only for the good of the empire, but for your own safety as well." The princess sighed deeply, feeling the weight of his words. She had known this all along, but now that the warrior was standing so close, to her, it felt different. It felt real. His presence was undeniable, and it made her question everything she had believed. Over the following days, the princess found herself more and more uncertain. She observed the human warrior from afar, trying to understand him. She had seen him during training sessions, his focus unwavering as he honed his skills with alien weapons. He was efficient, his every movement sharp and deliberate. Yet, there was no arrogance in him. His confidence was quiet, unspoken, and it made her question how much of it was true. Could someone so calm and controlled also have a fiery spirit? Or was he simply a soldier, doing his duty without passion? During one of their interactions in the royal gardens, the princess finally decided to speak to him, to see if she could gain any insight into the man who had become such an enigma to her. She found him sitting near a small fountain, his eyes fixed on the flowing water, lost in thought. "Warrior," she began, her voice hesitant but firm. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Princess," he said simply, acknowledging her presence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the gentle trickling of the water from the fountain. "I have been thinking," the princess said, her voice softer now, "about you, about everything." He raised an eyebrow, though his face remained as calm as ever. "And what have you concluded, princess?" She paused, unsure of how to express the swirl of thoughts in her mind. "I have concluded that you are not what I expected. I thought you would be nothing more than a soldier, a weapon to use for our cause, but you are not like that. You are different." The human warrior's gaze softened, just for a moment. "And what makes you think that, princess?" She looked down at her feet, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "You do not act like the others, the soldiers, the generals. You do not fight for glory or for pride. You fight because it is your duty, isn't it?" He didn't answer immediately, and for a long moment the only sound was the water. The princess could feel his gaze on her, searching for something. She held her breath, waiting. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "Duty, yes, but it is not just duty, princess. It is my belief in what I am doing. I fight for those who cannot, for those who need protection, even if they do not ask for it." The princess looked at him, her heart pounding. There was something in his voice, something real, that struck a chord within her. For a brief moment she allowed herself to see him not as a tool for her father's plans, but as a man who believed in what he did. "Do you believe in the Empire?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human warrior looked at her for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I believe in what it can be," he said quietly. "Not what it is now, but what it could become if the right people are in charge." For the first time, the princess felt something stir inside her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was something deeper, something she couldn't quite understand. Maybe, just maybe, this human warrior wasn't just a political tool. Maybe there was more to him than she could ever imagine. As they stood there, in the quiet of the royal gardens, the princess realized that her journey with him had only just begun. And that journey, she knew, would change her in ways she couldn't yet fathom. The days passed, and the princess found herself constantly drawn back to thoughts of the human warrior. No longer was he just a foreign soldier in her father's war. He had become something more. With each passing conversation, each fleeting moment where their paths crossed, the princess began to see him differently. He wasn't the monster she had feared. He wasn't just a tool to secure her empire's future. No, he was a man with a code, a set of values, and a way of seeing the galaxy that she had never understood before. And somewhere, deep inside her, a small voice whispered that maybe she had misjudged him from the start. The princess found herself seeking him out more often. It wasn't anything planned or deliberate. She didn't want to admit to herself what was happening, but she couldn't ignore the pull. She wanted to understand him better, to know what made him so different from everyone else in the court. She found that he was often alone, often away from the pomp and ceremony of the palace. It was in these moments, when the noise of the royal life faded away, that she could see a side of him that few others did. One evening, she found him outside, standing beneath the twin moons, watching the stars with a quiet intensity. He didn't notice her approach, lost in thought as he was. The princess hesitated for a moment. What was it about him that made her want to talk to him like this, in private? It didn't make sense. She was the princess, and he was a warrior, a tool, as her father had called him. There was no room for such connections. But the more she thought about it, the less she cared about the rules. Something about the human warrior made her want to reach out, to bridge the gap that separated them. "Warrior," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was softer than she expected, almost hesitant. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment he said nothing. It was as though he was searching for something in her gaze. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, he acknowledged her presence. "Princess," he greeted her. "What brings you here?" The question was simple enough, but the princess could hear the undercurrent of curiosity in his voice. She didn't have an answer for him. Not one that made sense, at least. Instead, she found herself standing beside him, her eyes following his gaze toward the distant stars. I wanted to talk," she said, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. About the war. About everything. The warrior didn't speak immediately. Instead, he glanced at her for a moment before looking back up at the sky. There was something about the way he stood there, as though waiting for her to find the right words. "The war is necessary," he said after a long silence. "We fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We fight to give them a chance at a better future." The princess nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully understood. She had always been told that war was about power. It was about securing territory, gaining influence, maintaining control. But the warrior spoke as though it was something more, something that transcended politics. "What do you believe in?" she asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. The warrior turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable. "I believe in honor," he said simply, "in fighting for something bigger than myself." His words lingered in the air between them. The princess couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have such certainty, to know that your actions, your choices, had a deeper meaning. She had never truly known that. She had always done what was expected of her, always followed the path laid out by her father. But the human warrior, he was different. He didn't follow orders blindly. He believed in something. "You're not like anyone else I've ever met," the princess said quietly, more to herself than to him. The warrior remained silent for a moment, his gaze still fixed on the stars. "I am not like your people, princess. I know that. But I am who I am, and I fight for what I believe in." She looked at him then, really looked at him. The way his features were softened by the moonlight, the way his posture seemed relaxed, yet poised for action. There was a quiet strength in him that she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't brute force. It was a kind of peace, a knowing that he had chosen his path and would walk it no matter what. "I don't understand everything about you," the princess admitted, "but I want to. I want to understand who you are, not just what you do." The warrior turned his head slightly, his eyes locking with hers. "What do you want to know?" The princess thought about it for a long moment. There were 1,000 questions swirling in her mind, but one stood out above the rest. "Why do you fight for us? For our empire? For me?" The warrior's gaze softened, and for the first time the princess saw a flicker of emotion, perhaps regret, perhaps something deeper, pass across his face. "I fight because it's my duty," he said quietly, "but also because I believe in the future. Your empire could be something great, Princess, something worth protecting, and I'm willing to fight for that." The princess felt her chest tighten at his words. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a pawn in her father's game. He believed in something greater than either of them, and somehow, that made him all the more real to her. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "You don't have to stay here, in this palace. You could leave, return to your people, live your life how you choose." The warrior's expression softened further, and for a moment the walls between them seemed to crumble. "I am where I am because I chose it," he said. "But what about you, Princess? You are bound by your duty. Do you truly want this life? Do you want the future your father has planned for you?" The princess's heart skipped a beat. She had never truly asked herself that question. She had always done what was expected, always followed the path set before her. But now, standing next to the human warrior, something inside her began to stir. Could she choose her own future? Could she break free from the chains of her father's expectations? For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, a life where she was free to make her own choices, free to follow her heart instead of her duty. But then the reality of the situation hit her. Her father's plans were already in motion. There was no turning back. "I don't know," the princess whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what I want anymore." The warrior looked at her with understanding in his eyes. "You'll figure it out, Princess. One step at a time." In that moment, the princess realized something she had never allowed herself to admit before. She wasn't alone. The human warrior, the man she had once feared, was now someone she could rely on. In his eyes, she saw not just a warrior, but a man who understood the weight of her choices, who understood the burden of being trapped between duty and desire. And for the first time in a long time, the princess felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to shape her own future. With him by her side, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The days leading up to the duel were filled with tension, as the air in the palace seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. The princess could feel the weight of her father's decision pressing down on her, heavier than ever before. Her heart was torn between her duty to the empire and her growing feelings for the human warrior. She had spent so many years obeying her father's every command, following the path that had been laid out for her. But now, with the final trial, before her, everything felt different. The princess had always known that her marriage to the human warrior was inevitable. Her father had made it clear. The rebellion that threatened their empire was too great, and the only way to secure their future was through this alliance. But as the days passed and her interactions with the warrior grew, she realized something she hadn't expected. She no longer saw him as just a tool or a means to an end. He had become something more, and now she wasn't sure if she could marry him just to satisfy her father's will. On the day of the duel, the entire palace was buzzing with activity. The grand arena had been set up, a vast open space surrounded by towering walls. Hundreds of nobles, generals, and officials had gathered to witness the event that would decide the fate of the princess's future. In the center of the arena, a raised platform was being prepared for the duel. The princess knew that her father would watch from the royal box, his eyes never leaving the scene. The pressure was unbearable. As the princess made her way to the arena, she found herself thinking about the warrior. She had heard rumors about the fierce battles he had fought, the countless lives he had taken in the name of honor. He was known throughout the galaxy as an unstoppable force, a man who could defeat anyone in battle. Yet, in the time they had spent together, she had come to see him as more than just a fighter. He was a man of principles, someone who had his own code of honor, But would that be enough to defeat the challenges ahead? The princess's thoughts were interrupted as she arrived at the arena's entrance. Her father stood at the top of the steps, waiting for her. His expression was stern, his eyes sharp with determination. "Daughter," he said, his voice low and commanding, "this duel is crucial. It is not just about securing the future of our empire. It is about proving that we are strong. You must understand that." The princess nodded, though a part of her felt as if she were trapped in a dream. How had it come to this? How had she become a mere pawn in this game of power and politics? As the princess entered the arena, she saw the human warrior standing at one end of the platform. His stance was calm, his eyes focused, but there was something in his posture that told her he wasn't just a soldier preparing for battle. He was more than that. He was a man who had made a choice to stand here, to fight for her, to fight for a future that neither of them fully understood. The arena fell silent as the two opponents stood facing each other. The princess couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and fear for the warrior. He was a man of incredible strength and skill, but he was also someone who had shown her kindness, someone who had shared his beliefs with her. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment she realized that she couldn't let him fight alone. She couldn't allow him to be used as a tool, a weapon for her father's plans. The emperor raised his hand, signaling for the duel to begin. The human warrior stepped forward, his movements swift and precise. His opponent, a fierce alien warrior from a neighboring planet, was no less skilled, but there was something different about this fight. The princess watched with bated breath as the two combatants clashed, their weapons sparking as they met. The sound of metal striking metal echoed through the arena, each strike a reminder of what was at stake. The princess's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the battle unfold. The human warrior moved with the grace of a dancer, his every motion calculated and deliberate. He was strong, but he was also quick, using his opponent's size against him. The alien warrior was larger, more powerful, but he lacked the precision and agility of the human. For a moment, the princess forgot about everything, the politics, the expectations, the weight of her father's plans. All that mattered was the fight. The warrior was fighting for something more than just victory. He was fighting for the future, for the chance to make a difference. As the duel reached its climax, the human warrior struck a final blow, disarming his opponent and sending him to the ground. The arena erupted into applause, the crowd roaring with approval. The princess watched, her heart racing, as the warrior stood tall, victorious. He had won, but it wasn't just the battle that had been won. It was something deeper, something more personal. As the human warrior turned to face her, the princess felt her breath catch in her throat. There was a fire in his eyes now, a fire that mirrored the one in her own heart. The pressure of the moment seemed to melt away, leaving only the two of them standing in the center of the arena. Her father's voice echoed from the royal box. "You have won the duel. Now you will marry her, and the empire will be yours to rule together." The words hit the princess like a cold wave. This was it. This was the moment that would define the rest of her life. But as she looked at the human warrior, standing tall and proud before her, she realized that this wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about choice. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of her own decisions. She had spent so much of her life following the path her father had set for her, but now, in the presence of the warrior, she saw a different path ahead, a path where she could make her own choices, where she could have a future that wasn't determined by her father's will alone. The human warrior stepped forward, his eyes locked onto hers. The moment stretched out, and for a brief instant, the world around them seemed to fade away. There was no more politics, no more expectations, only the two of them, standing side by side in the center of the arena. "I did this for you," the warrior said, his voice quiet but steady. "I did it because I believe in you. In us." The princess took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been prepared to follow her father's command, to marry this warrior because she had no other choice. But now, standing before him, she realized that she had a choice after all, and for the first time in her life, the princess smiled. The days following the duel were filled with uncertainty and change. The princess had never imagined that victory in the arena would feel so bittersweet. She had always known that her marriage to the human warrior was inevitable, but now that the moment had arrived, she felt both relief and apprehension. The weight of the future seemed to press down on her more than ever. The palace was alive with activity as preparations for the wedding began. The grand hall was being decorated with flowers from all corners of the empire, the air filled with the fragrance of blooms she had never seen before. She was surrounded by the finest clothing, the most luxurious fabrics, and the most opulent jewels. Yet none of it seemed to matter to her. It was all so empty. Her father, the emperor, had insisted on the grandest of ceremonies, a celebration of the union that would strengthen their empire. But for the princess, it was difficult to enjoy the splendor. She felt as though she were caught between two worlds, the world her father had planned for her, and the one she had discovered with the human warrior. The warrior. She still couldn't believe how much he had changed her life. When they had first met, she had feared him. She had seen him only as a tool, an instrument of her father's will. But now she saw him as something more, something she could trust, something that made her believe that maybe there was more to her future than following orders. And yet, as the day of the wedding drew closer, doubts lingered in her heart. Could she truly marry him? Could she live with the choice she had made? The princess sat alone in her chambers one evening, gazing out at the vast landscape beyond the palace walls. The stars twinkled in the sky, their light soft and peaceful. She wondered what it would be like to step outside the palace and live a life free of expectation, free of the burdens of royalty. But she knew that such a life was not possible. Her duty would always be with her. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see her father standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Daughter," he said, his voice steady but filled with authority. "The time has come. Tomorrow you will marry the human warrior. It is the only way forward, the only way to secure our future." The princess stood and walked toward him, her mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. "I know, father," she said quietly. "I know it is necessary, but—" Her father raised an eyebrow. But I don't know if it is what I want," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have spent my entire life following your commands, doing what was expected of me. But now, with the warrior, I am not sure. Can I truly live with this choice?" Her father's expression softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "You are the heir to the throne. You do not have the luxury of choosing what you want. You must do what is best for the empire, and this marriage is the best thing for us. Do not let your feelings cloud your judgment." The princess felt a pang of frustration in her chest. She had spent so many years doing exactly what her father expected. And now, when she was finally on the verge of something different, something that could be her own, she was being told to follow the same old path. "But what if what is best for the empire isn't what I want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's eyes narrowed. "The empire comes first, always." The princess bit her lip, feeling the familiar weight of her duty settle back onto her shoulders. She knew her father was right. The empire did come first, but that didn't make it any easier. She wanted more than this. She wanted to make her own choices, to shape her own future. But her role as the princess, her role as heir to the throne, would never allow that. As her father left her chambers, The princess stood at the window, staring out at the stars. For the first time, she felt truly alone. The weight of her responsibilities, the weight of her father's expectations seemed more suffocating than ever before. She had never questioned her duty until now. But now, with the human warrior by her side, she felt torn between two paths, one dictated by tradition, and the other by the possibility of something new, something that could be hers. The next morning, the grand hall was filled with the sounds of celebration. Nobles, generals, and dignitaries from all over the empire had gathered to witness the wedding. The princess stood at the front, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared to take the next step in her life. She wore a gown made of silver and gold, its intricate designs reflecting the light from the chandeliers above. Her father stood beside her, his presence imposing as ever, and then the human warrior entered. The room seemed to hold its breath as the warrior stepped into the hall. His presence was undeniable. He was a man of few words, but in that moment, his silence spoke volumes. He was here, not just for the empire, but for her. The princess felt her heart flutter in her chest as their eyes met across the room. He stood, tall and strong, his eyes filled with determination, but there was something else in them now, something softer, something that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have a future together. The ceremony began, but the princess hardly heard the words being spoken. She was lost in the moment, lost in the realization that this was happening. The life she had known was about to change forever, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But as she took the warrior's hand, she realized that maybe she didn't have to be ready. Maybe, with him by her side, she could learn to face whatever came next. When the vows were exchanged, the princess spoke her words with a quiet strength. She was no longer just a pawn in her father's game. She was someone who could choose her own future, and with that choice, she could shape the destiny of the empire, one step at a time. The human warrior looked at her with respect, his eyes filled with something more than just duty. He had fought for her. He had stood by her side when no one else would. And now, together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the ceremony ended, the crowd erupted into applause. The princess and the warrior stood together, their hands clasped, ready to face the future as one. The princess could feel a sense of calm wash over her. The road ahead would not be easy, but with the warrior by her side, she knew she could face anything. The empire was about to enter a new era, one where strength, honor, and love could coexist. And for the first time in her life, the princess felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. She was no longer just a figurehead, no longer just a symbol of her father's power. She was a leader in her own right. And with the human warrior at her side, they would build a future that was truly theirs.